The roots of continental philosophy began taking shape after the debates of German idealism, as we saw in the previous tutorial. Simultaneously, the early draft of what would become analytic philosophy began to form. As science frequently leaped forward after the end of the medieval period, so did our understanding of natural processes, and likewise our own behavior and function. Only some 70 years after Comte claimed no other Newton could ever tell us the inner purpose of existence of a blade of grass, Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859 and identified the automated, blind, and slow process of evolution through natural and artificial selection. With it, he was able to almost single-handedly revolutionize the scientific method and provide a practical, observable explanation to what Kant thought was beyond the a priori power of reason, dealing a fatal blow to metaphysically teleological theories of science. Science veered away from religious thought like never before, as naturalistic explanations began to dominate the syllabus in every level of learning, reinforcing the already strong empiricist perspective. In this context, Auguste Comte began writing in the first half of the 19th century. He was responsible for the formal establishment of both social sciences and philosophy of science, and he followed the empiricist path of attempting to understand the world within the observable limits of nature. He aimed to develop a unified research framework encompassing all sciences, which he called positivism, as theological and metaphysical investigation were inherently flawed for him, since only natural phenomena provide positive knowledge. It is then only through empirical methods that we can arrive at positive truths about the world. History, for example, should be like studying the physics of society. As we analyze the empirical data on society, we could learn about natural laws involved with social relations through time. Attempting to derive an inherent essence of these laws would be a futile effort of speculative metaphysics, and so he established the social sciences, or social physics as he called it, being the amalgam of historical, statistical, biological, and other sciences relevant to the analysis of society as a whole. With it, one could not only finally truly understand society, but also properly exert social change. Sociology, then, would be the epitome of the complexity and concreteness of science, as human life encompassed all possible sciences which existed back then. Likewise, as we go back in complexity and concreteness towards simplicity and abstraction, we ultimately reach mathematics, with every science having a degree of reliance to each other. Social sciences need biology, biology needs chemistry, which in turn needs physics, and so on. However, with one never being reducible to another. But more than systematizing the whole of science, he turned it into philosophy. No philosophical or scientific endeavors exist isolated from one another, and development in one area directly affects all of the others. Political philosophy and philosophy of science thus coexist, unified into the whole of human knowledge. The fast development of the interconnections of science and philosophy during this period, however, was not without its flaws. Herbert Spencer, one of the main defenders of Darwin's work in Victorian age Great Britain, known for coining the popular expression survival of the fittest, was one of the first proponents of a direct empiricist interpretation of ethics and political philosophy, a vanguard position generating much controversy to this day. Following the footsteps of Mill, he attempted to develop an updated version of a fully naturalized utilitarian theory, or a synthetic philosophy as he called it, informed by biology, psychology, and what would soon become sociology in the vein of Comte, but he unwittingly veered into the natural, as Aquinas' conception of an ethics founded on an abstract metaphysical intuition. One of the first misunderstandings he had of Darwin's theory was that of progress. While evolution was originally blind and aimless, relying on random mutations and selection from the individuals of a species best adapted to an environment, Spencer's understanding was that it meant the enhancement and selection of the objective best traits, generating then our society and its ever-advancing progress. Thus, he equivocally concludes that our intellectual prowess would be optimized toward choosing the best ethical and political values as time passes. Nevertheless, his errors were exaggerated by many in early contemporary philosophy, and though flawed, his theory has recently been reassessed as an important development of utilitarianism. He recognized every individual as egotistical, prone to their own survival, but that life in society was the greatest evidence that cooperation had inherent value, and thus political and ethical values would need to reflect the respect and stimulation for both living in community and individual choices. Therefore, he also defended inalienable rights to individuals which utility itself could never sacrifice, regardless of the situation, a shift in Mill's development as the latter considered individual rights bendable if required for the greater good. We should note that Spencer's theory has some eugenics built into it, and his theory did inspire some Nazi rhetoric about a perfect race, used still to this day to justify bigotry. As the late 19th century drew near the end of the modern era, two more figures would encapsulate what would become the analytic tradition in the pragmatist school of thought, which, as the name suggests, was focused on the empiricist tradition of practical focus on philosophical subjects. Although it could be considered a third school itself, it nevertheless set the stage for what analytic authors would become. Charles Peirce, its polymath founder, took the empiricist and Comte's projects a step further, denying the representative role of our intellectual capacities, which would in turn be akin to tools for pragmatic problem solving. This means that instead of focusing on pure concepts or abstract thought, our cognitive functions would work with a practical purpose. For this, he embraced an extremely naturalist perspective on Spinoza's monism, in that everything in existence was physically natural and empirically verifiable, and thus the scientific method was the only possible tool towards stable truths. He thus established what would become semiotics, a theory of signs which replace abstract and metaphysical conceptual meaning toward a practical analysis of its context, or semiosis. Signs for him could be anything: a spoken word, a smoke signal, a given look, a carved symbol, which would serve as a connection between an interpretant interacting with it and whatever that sign was trying to convey. For example, when I say dogs, this sound becomes a sign which connects you, the listener, to the memory of four-legged mammals most of us are aware of. Signs permeate the cosmos, from language and general artificial symbols to actions and reactions, and so, as it would become a standard for pragmatism, a concept without any practical or experiential effect in our factual lives would be meaningless. This perspective allowed for logic to take a central role in his theory, as it would be the main tool for analyzing symbols toward truth. Ironically, however, though representative of pragmatism and the analytic tradition, semiotics would become more relevant to the continentals, as we will see in later tutorials. He thoroughly influenced the brother of the famous literary author Henry James, psychologist William James, who forewent logical rigor in favor of a more psychologically focused pragmatism. As per his profession and influence from Peirce, he was epistemologically concerned with how beliefs and ideas influence practical life instead of abstract analysis. But he led this investigation into morality and social life, much like Comte. Truth, then, would require usefulness to its believer, but as we are animals of emotion and seldom truly stop for proper scientific analysis of the world, he stated that we live in a state of radical empiricism, where our bodily sensations and perception frequently correct themselves according to our emotions toward ever-changing beliefs. He is partly responsible, as the name suggests, for the James Lange theory of emotion, where emotions are immediate physiological responses to stimuli, and thus fear, for example, would be the name we attribute posteriorly to the fact that we ran after seeing a bear, as we discussed in the psychology series. All of these authors, in the final years of modernity, directly shaped what research would become in our time, in philosophy and several other sciences. In the next tutorial, we will finish up with the modern era by delineating some of the advances that allowed for the revolution in logical thinking in the beginning of the 20th century, though still being very much limited by the Aristotelian formulations of ages before. Then we will continue into the 20th century and the beginning of contemporary philosophy, which seamlessly began by the time the last moderns were still alive and writing their theories, thus marking their unequivocal influence over the last century and philosophy as we study it today.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on Patreon so I can keep making content. And as always, feel free to email me, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com.